Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. The lake was silent, but I knew war was coming. After years of hiding from the world, I built my cabin into a fortress of solitude. Then they came, shiny houses, screaming kids, and one HOA queen named Karen ready to claim my land. They picked the wrong man to fight. It was the kind of quiet most people pay to experience. Out here, tucked into the dense evergreens of northeastern Washington, the only sounds I usually heard were the wind through the trees, loons on the lake, and sometimes, just sometimes, the creak of a pine settling in the cold. My name is Luke Hudson, and I don't do neighbors, not anymore. After 20 years of burning myself out as a land use attorney in Seattle and one particularly violent car crash that took my younger brother Danny, I cashed out, walked away, and retreated to the only place that ever made sense, our lake cabin. We'd bought it together years ago under a family trust, planning to use it as a weekend escape. 120 acres of shoreline, forest, and legal peace. After Danny's death, I made it permanent. I didn't just live here, I fortified it. The property was marked clearly at every entrance with large signs reading, "Private property, no trespassing. Entire shoreline is owned." I had boundary sensors buried, motion-activated trail cameras, and a legal packet ready to go at all times. You could say grief turned me into a hermit, but I preferred the term prepared recluse. For nearly a year, everything was fine. I saw the occasional lost hiker or tipsy kayaker drift too close, but a quick bark from the speakers connected to my drone surveillance system usually sent them paddling in the other direction. Then came the construction. Across the lake. They called it Emerald Shore. 16 oversized homes packed like teeth along the southern bank, with aluminum roofs and names like the Cascadian and Forest Dream. HOA flags sprouted like weeds. I watched the subdivision rise from the forest like a fungus, and with it came the inevitable. Signs about community lake access, people trying to fish off my rocks, kids screaming on paddleboards, and one particularly bold man who tried to dock at my pier like it was a hotel marina. At first, I tried the polite route. I drafted a letter, clear, legally sound, but friendly in tone, addressed to whom it may concern at Emerald Shore HOA. It outlined the recorded deed of the trust, attached a parcel map, and kindly explained that their side of the lake ended at the waterline. Everything beyond that, water, shore, and even the lake bed itself belonged to me. I emailed it, mailed it, and even handed a copy to one of their contractors. A week later, I got mail, a real glossy HOA letterhead envelope. Inside, a notice of violation for obstruction of community lake access, and an invitation to join Emerald Shore HOA, complete with a fake-friendly note about how mutual cooperation benefits all shoreline residents. It ended with a highlighted section warning of potential fines accruing weekly if I failed to comply. I nearly choked on my coffee. Then came the kayaks. 2 bright yellow ones beached at my dock like they owned the place. I checked my cameras. 2 families from across the lake had paddled over, tied off to my cleats, and gone hiking up one of my trails. No message, no permission, just helped themselves. So I helped them back by lugging their gear across my field and placing it neatly on the gravel road next to a return to sender sign I built out of scrapwood. I took photos, GPS stamped, time-coded, just in case. The next morning, I found a passive-aggressive sticky note on my gate. Sharing the lake is neighborly. Being territorial is not. Signed with a smiley face. Cute. I responded the only way I knew how. I doubled the number of signs, replaced one trail camera with a 4K infrared model, and sent another certified letter to the HOA president, a woman named Karen Griffith, recently listed as such in their public newsletter. Her name should have been a red flag. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe she was just misinformed. But the moment her neighbors kept showing up with inflatable rafts and coolers like this was Coachella, it became clear they were being told the lake was public, or worse, that they had a right to it. Which they didn't. I'm not some backwoods loon waving a shotgun at squirrels. I spent 2 decades fighting municipalities, developers, and private owners over land use. I knew every clause, every easement, and every legal trick in the book. And more importantly, I knew how to close loopholes. This land was buttoned up tighter than a military base. And yet, every day it felt like the pressure was rising. I caught a neighbor walking his golden retriever along my shoreline like it was a public trail. I said hello. He said, "Didn't know this was your side." I pointed at the 9 signs surrounding him. He nodded and walked off without a word. Then I got a second letter from the HOA, this time with a list of required modifications for shoreline harmony. It included suggested fencing styles, paint options for my cabin, mind you, not suburban clone box, and a proposal to move the dock 5 feet east to improve symmetry. With the southern neighbor, I laughed so hard I knocked over my coffee again. That's when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a play, a slow encroachment, a soft pressure campaign wrapped in smiles and HOA stationery. So I did what I always do when something smells off. I went quiet, not passive, strategic. I updated my legal packets. I scanned every document. I made a few calls to old colleagues in Spokane and Boise. And I waited. I had a feeling that sooner or later, someone was going to cross a line. And when they did, I'd be ready. It was a Sunday morning, the kind that reminded you why you'd left everything behind in the first place. Cool mist rising from the lake, the trees wrapped in a kind of sleepy stillness. I stepped out onto my porch in a pair of shorts and a ratty t-shirt, mug of black coffee in hand, barefoot, unshaven, and blissfully unaware that the HOA had just decided to escalate from passive aggression to something resembling amateur theater. I heard them before I saw them, the crunch of gravel, the telltale stomp of heavy boots. I stepped off the porch and onto the dewy lawn, just as 3 sheriff's department vehicles rolled to a slow stop at the front gate. Out stepped 2 uniformed deputies and 1 older officer I vaguely recognized from a zoning dispute years ago. And then, like the main act in a low-budget drama, came Karen Griffith. She emerged from the passenger seat of a silver Range Rover, clutching a stack of manila folders to her chest like she was about to deliver a sermon. Blonde bob perfect, tracksuit immaculate, face tight with self-importance and whatever suburban flavor of righteousness she injected into her kale smoothies. Karen pointed at me with the kind of authority usually reserved for small-town pageant judges and mall cops. "You're illegally occupying public shoreline," she declared, voice high and rehearsed. "You are to evacuate immediately. The HOA has filed an emergency community ordinance." I blinked, took a sip of coffee. "You're going to want to walk that back." One of the deputies stepped forward, already uneasy. "Sir, we'd appreciate it if you'd cooperate until we can review the documents. This is just a routine request." "No, it's not," I said calmly. "Not for you. Not for me. Not for anyone." Karen pushed forward, waving a stapled pack of papers like it was the Constitution. "This land is now designated for community lake access. You've been advised multiple times. You've refused to comply. We're invoking HOA emergency powers under Civic Code." I turned and walked away. Didn't say a word, just let the silence stretch. Inside, I went straight to the lockbox, popped the latch, and pulled out the heavy leather-bound binder that held everything: the original family trust, the deed, certified maps from the county assessor, and the notarized documents confirming ownership of the lake bed, the shoreline, and the buffer zone extending 50 feet into the surrounding forest. No ambiguity, no loopholes. By the time I walked back out, Karen was pacing like a madwoman, lecturing the senior officer about community stability and spiritual wellness through shared waters. He looked about 1 eye roll away from retiring early. I handed the binder to the youngest deputy. Kid looked about 22 and already regretting his career choice. "Every inch of shoreline, dock, and surrounding property is mine. Not rented, not leased, owned outright under recorded trust. Documents notarized, recorded, and confirmed by both counties due to the dual border nature of the lake." He opened it, saw the stamps, the signatures, the thick red ribbon on the trust packet. His eyebrows shot up. Karen wasn't having it. "Those documents are irrelevant. The community has spoken." I held up a finger. "You mean your HOA, Karen, your little condo cult. You have no jurisdiction here. And what you're doing is criminal impersonation of authority." The senior deputy glanced over at the paperwork, took a long breath, and then asked, "Is there any record of a legitimate ordinance with the county?" "None," I said. "Because what she's holding is a PowerPoint converted to PDF and stapled like it means something." Karen started shouting over me. "He's belligerent, he's aggressive, he threatened me." I didn't bother engaging. I pulled out my tablet, tapped into the network, and brought up the camera feed from the week before. I cast it straight to the projector panel I'd installed on the porch for movie nights. Suddenly, Karen's image appeared 10 feet tall, caught red-handed, in glorious 1080p, breaking the padlock on the Forest Path gate and nailing up a hand-painted sign. Community Lakefront Access. Residents welcome. She looked up at the screen like she was watching her own execution. The deputies just stared. The silence dragged out like wet rope. Finally, the older officer stepped back and radioed something in quietly. Karen stammered, pointing at me. This is entrapment. That's private footage." "No, ma'am," said the younger deputy, flipping the binder closed. "It's surveillance of private property, and it shows clear trespass and vandalism." The older one turned to her. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with us for questioning. You can bring your documents. You can make your case at the station." Karen's jaw dropped. "You're arresting me." "No," he said plainly. "But you're not walking away from this without answering a few questions." She started to protest again, but the moment had shifted. Her words carried no weight. The officers were no longer listening to her. She was just background noise now. As they walked her toward the cruiser, I heard her mutter, "This isn't over. I have legal authority. This entire shoreline is subject to communal ethics." The officer gently closed the car door on her mid-rant. I took another sip of coffee. "Sir," the young deputy asked, "is there anyone else currently trying to access your land?" "Just the usual floaters and entitled idiots, but I keep good records." He nodded. "We'll be in touch." I watched the convoy roll away. The lake shimmered in the morning light like nothing had happened, but something had. For the first time, they'd crossed the line from annoying to unlawful, and for the first time, I saw fear in Karen Griffith's eyes. 2 days after the HOA's Sunday morning stunt, I received a large envelope in the mail. No return address, glossy paper. It smelled like cheap toner and desperation. Inside was a bound copy of the so-called emergency ordinance Karen had waved around like a crusader's manifesto. This time it was cleaner, printed like something semi-official, complete with a fake county seal, a 6-digit ordinance number, and the signature of someone named Deputy Counselor Raymond P. Gleason. Problem was, there was no such person in either of the counties bordering the lake. I checked. Twice. And the seal? It was a modified clip art logo with a pine tree in the middle, stolen directly from a municipal template website. Karen didn't just lie. She put effort into it. This was no neighborhood spat anymore. This was fraud dressed up as governance. I called an old friend from my Seattle law firm days, Terry, a senior litigation bulldog now doing consulting work in Spokane. I emailed him the documents, asked for a quick assessment. 5 minutes later, he called me, laughing. "This ordinance," he said, "was built off a generic HOA template from Reddit. They didn't even change the metadata. I just pulled the file history. It was last edited on a Chromebook by someone named Griffith57. Luke, this is the legal equivalent of trying to rob a bank with a paintball gun. That alone would have been enough for me to start drawing up an official complaint." But the real kicker came from a realtor friend of mine named Maya. She'd helped me with a side property years ago, and she was now handling listings in the very development across the lake, Emerald Shore. She called me with a voice that vibrated between amusement and rage. "Luke," she said, "do you know they're advertising your shoreline in their listings?" "What?" "They're claiming community access. It's in the property descriptions. Shared dock access included, and private beach frontage via HOA trail. They even showed your pier in 2 of the listing photos. I recognized your canoe." I stared at the phone like it had insulted my ancestry. "They're using my property to inflate real estate prices. 2 lots pending sale. They've jacked up prices since that last HOA newsletter. This is real money, Luke." Now it made sense. The fake ordinance. The sudden push to create access. They weren't just testing boundaries, they were marketing them. Karen had taken a swing at redefining reality, betting no one would notice before the escrow closed. That's when I snapped into motion. I wasn't just going to fend them off anymore. I was going to dismantle the whole machine. I began building the case. I pulled every relevant document from the property trust: title history, parcel maps, environmental easements, the riparian boundaries, and full jurisdictional overlays between counties. I also submitted a public records request to the Emerald Shore HOA, which under state law was obligated to provide financial statements, board meeting minutes, and resident communications upon formal inquiry. Naturally, they ignored the request. That was fine, because I'd already started drafting my complaint. The lawsuit was going to name 2 defendants, the HOA as an entity, and Karen Griffith personally. The charges: civil trespass, vandalism, defamation, fraudulent misrepresentation, commercial interference, unauthorized use of law enforcement resources, and, for the cherry on top, attempted appropriation of private land for financial gain. Before filing, I applied for a temporary restraining order, a TRO, against any and all actions by the HOA or its agents within 500 feet of my property line. The county judge granted it within 48 hours. That same day, I posted laminated copies of the order along the trail that Karen had once tried to liberate. I also added trail cam overlays and upgraded the perimeter sensors to trip and alert if anyone so much as sneezed near my shoreline. Then, like clockwork, came the online counterattack. Karen took to the Emerald Shore HOA forum, posting a heartfelt message titled "Toxic Property Owners: The Hidden Threat to Shared Lakes." She painted herself as a martyr of community unity, accused me of male aggression, resource hoarding, and my personal favorite, geographic gatekeeping. 2 days later, she had an op-ed published in a local lifestyle magazine titled "When One Man Owns the Water, Why Community Must Push Back." I didn't respond publicly. Not yet. Instead, I compiled everything: screenshots, URLs, timestamps, metadata. I collected testimonies from the 2 families whose kayaks I'd returned, neighbors who had received conflicting maps from the HOA, and even a contractor who admitted, off record of course, that Karen had instructed them to ignore the crazy guy's signs. One particularly damning piece was a group email Karen had sent to the HOA residents shortly after my drone footage surfaced. She wrote, "Luke Hudson's claim is built on old paper. We're building community on real people. If he won't join us, we must treat the shoreline as rightfully ours. The board will back you. Don't back down." I printed that one in triplicate. The next day, I received another letter, this time hand-delivered. No envelope, just folded paper held together by a pink binder clip. It was from someone named Jason, a member of the HOA board. He wrote, "I didn't sign up for this kind of mess. Karen's telling us not to talk to you, but I think we're being set up. If you ever need a statement, I'm willing. Off the record, at first." I smiled. There it was, the first crack in the wall. I scanned everything into a secure folder and labeled it HOA Apocalypse, Phase 1. Then I sat down, poured myself a whiskey, and started writing the formal complaint that would introduce Karen Griffith and her Kingdom of Fantasy bylaws to the real legal system. There's something uniquely satisfying about dropping a legal anvil on someone who thought they were playing hopscotch. The morning I filed the complaint, I walked into the county courthouse in jeans and a flannel, clutching a leather folder like it was a sacred text. The clerk at the filing desk skimmed the packet, nodded slowly, then raised her eyebrows when she hit the exhibits section, 74 pages long. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't have to. By noon, the TRO against the Emerald Shore HOA was active and posted in every relevant registry. It prohibited any member of the HOA, including board officers, from engaging in any acts of signage, access, or alteration on or near my property. 500 feet, which coincidentally wiped out their community trail, the boat launch they'd half finished with HOA funds, and the viewing platform some retiree named Glenn had built entirely on my soil. The news traveled fast. That evening, a man in boat shoes and a Patagonia vest showed up at my gate, waving what he claimed was a recreational easement license. I took one look and said, "That's a Costco return form with the serial numbers scratched out." He left without argument. Then came the real pushback. Karen must have realized the lawsuit wasn't just noise, because suddenly she activated a new front: public image warfare. First, I noticed a burst of anonymous online reviews for my non-existent lakefront rental, all of them with titles like "Rude Host," "Very Territorial," and "Felt Unsafe Near Property Owner." I laughed, then called in a takedown request for impersonation. Then came a new tactic. I was eating lunch on the deck when I heard tires crunching on gravel again. Another SUV, not law enforcement this time. A sleek black Suburban with Oregon plates and a man in a charcoal suit stepping out like he was headed to a TED Talk. He introduced himself as Mr. Weston, representing a private real estate fund looking to quietly acquire unique lakeside parcels. He didn't come out and say, "buy you out," but the implication was clear. A high seven-figure number was floated. He spoke in practiced, smooth tones, complimented my cabin's rustic charm, and dropped Karen's name like she was just a mutual acquaintance. I asked where his fund was based. He said Boise. I asked which firm. He coughed, mumbled something vague, and handed me a business card with a Gmail address printed on it. I offered him a chair, poured him a drink, and waited until he took a sip. Then I asked if he'd like to hear a recording of the last interested buyer who threatened me with municipal cooperation if I didn't sell. He stood up so fast he nearly spilled the whiskey, claimed he might have the wrong address. I told him to take the scenic route back and waved him off with the same fake smile he'd used on me. Later that night, I traced the Gmail address back to a dormant LLC tied to the developer who'd built Emerald Shore. It was almost sweet how sloppy they were becoming. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't done. Apparently unsatisfied with paper warfare and shadow buyers, she took it a step further. She hired a private investigator. I spotted him because I know the breed. Clean jeans that had never seen a lawnmower, sunglasses even on cloudy days. A Ford Explorer parked across the lake, just barely visible behind a line of pines. He made the mistake of trying to access one of my back trails, presumably to document violations. Too bad for him, I had infrared motion sensors and a camera disguised as a bird box that caught the moment he ducked under my no-entry rope. He got about 20 feet in before I met him on the trail with a thermal mug of coffee and a GoPro strapped to my chest. "Lost?" I asked. "Just hiking." "In cargo slacks? With a 300mm lens?" "Right." He gave me a stiff smile and left without another word. The next day, I mailed Karen's attorney a cease and desist for illegal surveillance and trespass by proxy, included a USB stick with the footage for her collection. At this point, even the HOA board started to wobble. I received a second anonymous letter, this one more desperate than the first. "You were right. Karen's pushing too hard. We didn't agree to all of this. She's acting on her own. Please don't take it out on all of us." I didn't respond. I wasn't going to split the tree when the root was still healthy. The HOA itself was compromised, rotten from the top down. Then, just when I thought I had the upper hand, I received a call from a friend in the county clerk's office. Off the record. "There's an amendment request filed under HOA authority," she whispered. "They're trying to redraw parcel lines. Make it look like the shoreline is common use." My jaw locked. Is that even legal? Not without the signature of the current landholder, which, last I checked, is still you. Karen was escalating to fraud at the registry level. That crossed into felony territory. So I filed an additional motion with the court, expanding the scope of the TRO and requesting a full injunction. I also filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general's office citing attempted fraudulent conveyance and land misrepresentation. The judge scheduled a hearing, and just like that, the game changed again. They hadn't just annoyed the wrong man. They'd weaponized bureaucracy against a man who built his career dismantling exactly this kind of bullshit. They thought I was just some bitter guy living alone in the woods. They were about to find out I was their worst possible enemy. The courthouse was a boxy concrete thing with a badly needed roof replacement and coffee that tasted like hot regret. I'd been there 100 times before, back when I wore suits and argued zoning cases for tech campuses and overbuilt golf resorts. This time, I wasn't billing by the hour. I was fighting for something that couldn't be replaced. The hearing for the injunction was scheduled for 10 in the morning. I showed up 15 minutes early, wearing jeans and a navy button-down, clean-shaven for once. Karen arrived fashionably late, of course, with a legal pad full of handwritten chaos and a junior attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I recognized him from a firm in Spokane that specialized in HOA disputes. Probably a last-minute hire once Karen realized the storm she'd summoned was about to eat her HOA whole. The judge was a no-nonsense woman named Helen Drury, sharp, dry, and not remotely interested in theatrics. I respected her. She once shut down an illegal RV park on tribal land with a 2-paragraph ruling and a stare that could curdle milk. Karen started strong in her own way. She stood up and began reading from her statement, claiming that the community's emotional well-being depended on shared access to natural resources, that my ownership was a historical anomaly, and that my refusal to allow access constituted spiritual hoarding. Yes, she said, spiritual hoarding. I actually looked over at her attorney, who visibly winced. When it was my turn, I stood, walked slowly to the front with the binder under my arm, and calmly laid out the facts. Parcel records, the trust documents, recorded deeds, the GPS-verified boundary surveys, the trail cam photos, the falsified ordinance, and the evidence that it was created on Karen's personal laptop, the drone footage of her vandalizing the gate, the fake buyer, the fake county signature, the altered property line amendment. Then I handed the judge a sealed envelope. Inside is a notarized statement from a member of the HOA board, testifying that Mrs. Griffith misled the board about legal boundaries and claimed verbal approval from county officials that don't exist. Judge Drury reviewed the envelope slowly, her eyes scanning every page. She didn't say much, just nodded once and looked over her glasses at Karen. Mrs. Griffith, did you fabricate documents intended to resemble county records? Karen opened her mouth, then looked at her lawyer. He leaned toward her and whispered something that definitely wasn't, "Yes, Your Honor." "I may have misunderstood formatting requirements," she finally said. Drury replied. "And did you or did you not instruct members of your HOA to enter Mr. Hudson's property despite posted restrictions and a legal claim of sole ownership?" Karen stared ahead. "We believe the access was implied." "There is no such thing as implied trespassing rights," the judge snapped. "You of all people should know that." Drury issued the injunction on the spot. "Full stop on all HOA activity within 500 feet of my property. No signage, no shoreline access, no community events. No more real estate listings that referenced shared lake frontage. Any violations would result in contempt of court and immediate sanctions." As we exited the courtroom, Karen muttered something behind me. I turned. "Something you want to say, Karen? You think you've won, but you're just one man." I smiled. "That's true. I'm just one man, with a title, a trust, 2 counties backing me, and now a court order. And you're a homeowners association with a messiah complex and a folder full of lies." She didn't reply, but it didn't end there. That same evening, I got a call from a contact in the DA's office. A formal investigation was opening into HOA fraud. And they weren't just looking at Karen, they were looking at the developer too. They'd found internal HOA emails suggesting that fraudulent boundary amendments had been used in promotional materials sent to investors, which meant real estate fraud, which meant prison time, if proven. It was all unraveling, and fast. Still, I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I'd been in too many battles to mistake a court victory for an endgame. People like Karen didn't surrender. They panicked. They lashed out. And when they did, they got reckless, which was exactly what I was counting on. I should have known Karen wouldn't take the court ruling like a sane person. The kind of ego it takes to rewrite property lines on a Google Doc and call it law doesn't just vanish when a judge hands down an injunction. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later. I was inspecting a section of the North Trail when I found a new wooden stake, freshly hammered into the ground. Bright orange tape fluttering like it belonged to a state survey team, but the markings didn't match anything official. It wasn't one of mine, and it definitely wasn't from the county. I followed the line. 5 more stakes led straight to a clearing near my boat shed. The last one had a laminated sheet clipped to it. Future community dock, environmental review in progress. They were still trying. Back at the cabin, I checked my motion cams and found footage of 2 men, unfamiliar faces, walking the line, measuring with a laser rangefinder. One of them wore a baseball cap with the logo of a regional engineering firm. I gave them 24 hours to file a permit, which I knew they wouldn't. Then I made some calls and filed a complaint for unauthorized land assessment. That same week, a neighbor from Emerald Shore, Jason, the same board member who'd sent me the anonymous letter, reached out again. This time, he wasn't whispering. "She's out of control," he said over coffee on my porch. "She's pushing to finalize a shoreline adjustment initiative, even after the ruling. Says the HOA will cover her if anything happens." "Cover her legally?" I asked. He shook his head. "Financially. She's trying to sell her house. Fast." I leaned in. "Wait, she's fleeing?" Jason nodded. "I think so. She mentioned a buyer, said she was tired of dealing with psychos. I thought she meant you, but now it's feeling shady." I dug deeper, pulled property records, and there it was. An open escrow account filed under a proxy LLC in Oregon. The listed agent? A known shell handler tied to luxury real estate deals used to move cash quietly. The sale was being processed under an expedited timeline. What's more, Karen had just granted temporary access rights to the lake to the buyer, included in the property deal as if she could. It was one final play. She'd realized the house of cards was falling and decided to bail, trying to turn a profit before the hammer dropped. But what she didn't realize was that one of the documents she filed, an internal HOA authorization to approve the sale, used a falsified board vote signed by C. Jennings, a non-existent board secretary. That's forgery. And that meant it was time for backup. I called Terry again, forwarded everything: escrow details, digital signatures, timestamps. Within hours, he filed a motion to freeze any property transactions involving Karen's address, citing active litigation and potential financial misconduct tied to the original fraud case. The next day, it got even better. My friend Maya, the real estate agent, called me laughing. "You won't believe this," she said. "Karen showed up at my office. She tried to cash out funds from the pending house sale. Said it was urgent travel expenses. Did she get anything? Nope. We flagged it after the injunction notice hit our system. State real estate fraud division's already involved. Karen had been caught trying to flee with forged documents, a fake board resolution, and escrow funds not yet legally cleared. They detained her at the Spokane office under suspicion of fraudulent real estate activity. No arrest yet, but enough to require immediate questioning and a formal freeze on the transaction. Her would-be buyer gone. Deal canceled, and the HOA. Now they were panicking. Emails started leaking, members demanding emergency meetings, neighbors furious they'd been misled. A printed newsletter from months ago suddenly resurfaced, one where Karen promised exclusive lake access by summer, with her signature beneath the map that included my shoreline. It was now evidence. To make matters worse for them, the court ordered an audit of the HOA's internal records. And in the process, they found something I hadn't even considered. Karen had been using discretionary funds meant for road maintenance and snow clearing to pay legal consultants and, incredibly, the private investigator she sent after me. All of it without board approval, embezzlement, wire fraud, maybe even tax evasion depending on how it was reported. At this point, I didn't have to push anymore. The machine was collapsing from the inside. I sat on my porch that night, bourbon in hand, listening to the wind whip through the pines. Across the lake, Emerald Shore looked like a painting, calm, lit up in warm suburban hues, all charm on the outside. But behind those closed doors, board members were scrambling, lawyers were calculating risk, and Karen was likely pacing in some sterile interview room, wondering how it all went sideways. It hadn't gone sideways. It had gone exactly where it needed to. By the time the warrant was issued for the Emerald Shore HOA office, I was already awake, sipping coffee and watching the mist roll off the lake. The call came in at 6:12 a.m. Sharp. Deputy Marshal Sloan, gravel-voiced, all business. "It's happening this morning, Mr. Hudson. You might want to be available." He didn't need to say more. At 8:05 a.m., 4 unmarked SUVs and 2 cruisers rolled up to the HOA administrative building, a converted farmhouse just past the gates of the development. The place had always looked like it belonged on a home renovation show. Whitewashed siding, fake shutters, a plaque that said, "Community Matters." Irony in 10-point font. They entered with purpose. No sirens, no spectacle. Just professionals doing their job. 10 minutes later, boxes started coming out. Laptops, file drawers, rolled up survey maps. I stood a respectful distance away, arms crossed, watching from across the road next to a friendly deputy who offered me a thermos of decent black coffee. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded occasionally, like we were both waiting for something to surface. And it did. 2 hours into the search, they found a hard drive labeled Archive Plans in faded marker. It contained scanned documents, doctored parcel maps, some using outdated county overlays, others with edited boundary lines, clearly placing my shoreline within HOA borders. Not rough drafts, polished, cleaned PDF, ready for marketing. But the crown jewel was a folder titled Expansion Strategy PH2. Inside were communications between Karen and the developer. One thread stood out. Subject: Lakefront Leverage. In it, Karen wrote, "If we don't control the shore, we lose the premium angle. Let him panic. Once we get 2 homes sold under the new brochure, we'll be untouchable. 2 homes, already sold, under false pretenses. That was real estate fraud, no question. But she hadn't stopped there. Another file, time-stamped just weeks ago, showed a drafted press release touting Emerald Shore's successful reclamation of neglected shoreline through HOA advocacy. She'd been planning to go public, paint herself a savior of land, of community stewardship, and use my property, my home, as the proof. The agents packed everything up, chain of custody recorded, every digital copy cloned on site. The last thing they removed was a corkboard. On it, pinned with colorful tacks, was a giant lake map. A red Sharpie line cut clean across my land, with a single handwritten note above it. Temporary line until legal clarity. Legal clarity, my ass. Later that day, I received a call from the prosecutor's office. They confirmed what I suspected. The 2 sold homes were under active review. One buyer already filed a complaint, claiming they were misled about lake access and expected community frontage, which now didn't exist. The fallout was beginning. As for Karen, she hadn't been seen since the failed house sale. No public appearances, no HOA messages. Her Range Rover sat parked at the end of her driveway like a monument to hubris. I heard she'd hired a new attorney, a criminal defense specialist. It was all unraveling beautifully. The news broke on a Tuesday. Not a scandalous headline in bold font, but a quiet story buried halfway down the homepage of the County Legal Digest. Emerald Shore HOA under investigation for fraudulent boundary representation. For most people, it was just another bureaucratic hiccup. For me, it was the thunder before the final collapse. Within hours, my inbox started filling. Journalists, realtors, lawyers, even a podcaster who specialized in HOA horror stories. They all wanted quotes, statements, interviews. I ignored most of them. I wasn't interested in attention. I was interested in one thing, closure. But then came the part I didn't expect. An email from a former Emerald Shore board member, Susan Kramer. I remembered her from the one HOA picnic I'd observed from a distance like a wildlife photographer studying a pack of oblivious deer. She wrote, "I want to apologize. I voted to support Karen's proposals. I didn't understand the full scope. We were told you were a squatter, that the shoreline was unclaimed. She misrepresented everything. If you're filing civil claims, I'm willing to testify." It wasn't the first apology, but it was the first that sounded like regret, not damage control. The court date for the civil suit had been set. Karen was officially named in the filings alongside the HOA, the developer, and the LLC used to funnel the false sales. Damages were being calculated not just on trespass and defamation, but also on the fraudulent depreciation attempt of my property's value. And while all that churned forward, I got to work on something else. Something petty, yes, but fully earned. I self-published a slim, sarcastic little paperback on Amazon. A blank journal titled How to Lose an HOA in 10 Lies, a guided notebook for aspiring dictators. On the back cover, a smiling cartoon version of Karen holding a community ordinance while drowning in paperwork. All proceeds donated to the Washington State Private Property Defense Fund. Within 48 hours, it was the #1 new release in HOA humor. I didn't even know that was a category. Neighbors from across the lake bought copies in bulk. Someone left one on Karen's porch. Another left it taped to the HOA bulletin board with a Post-it note that read, "Meeting moved to the courthouse." Petty? Sure, but satisfying.